Well, it's time to talk about New World. Again. They have swimming this time.
Through the endless tides of time, they've come to these mythical shores.
Should you play New World Aternum? That's gonna be the question here. And I kind of want to go over some of the positives, some of the negatives, and why the hell we're talking about New World again as a new launch in a weird way. There's a lot to it. New World Aternum is, of course, just New World. New World, the MMO, is now New World Aternum, the ARPG, but it's still exactly the same MMO that New World was. There is not really a functional change. It is the same game. Just to get that out of the way at the beginning. But the answer to whether you should play this game or not, well, it turns out it's actually kind of complicated. Something that I kind of came to as a decision after playing the open beta recently. Let's break it down, and if you want to just skip to the positive and negatives, I've put some timestamps in the thing so you can just skip right over there. But first, we have to talk about the fact that yes, 3 years after launch, we have a beta, a new name for the game, and a genre change, at least in the branding. To some, this was a needed refresh to a game that had crashed from almost 1 million peak players at launch to around 3,000 players, even after multiple attempts to revitalize it with a new player experience, a new expansion, and battle passes. Okay, the last one actually isn't really a positive, it's just a microtransaction. But the amount of comments I still see asking the question is New World Aternum some new game, or is it a single-player RPG? Even now, after several clarifications, is testament to just how bad the Aternum rebrand was handled. But it still might work. After playing it a bit, a console audience not burdened by the last few years of New World may actually really like it. Not because of what Aternum is, but because of all the work over the last few years to actually find an identity for this MMO. An identity as a PvE MMO. That's right, it's not Aternum that is the big rebrand here. It's trying to show to a brand new audience everything that they've done over the last couple years with the rebrand. And if they do that, and if they can find that audience that is untapped, it might actually work. At least for a couple months. It's a gambit they had to take. New World is not as bad as people make it out to be, but they can't be blamed for those opinions, because when it launched, it kind of was that bad. Hell, there were issues with the game even before it launched. At launch, it lacked any identity, because you could still tell it was trying to be both a survival PvP MMO, but had in recent years of their development shifted toward PvE. That shift had come too late. The PvE was unfinished, it was lackluster, and it was just borderline crap. Even the lore and the world premise was tenuous at best. It was as incomplete as their much-memed lack of swimming. More on that in a moment. They spent the next 3 years post-launch making the lore and world salvageable, adding in memorable characters and locales that just simply didn't exist before, making a conscious effort to make the story relatable. With Aternum, they've obviously put a ton of work into flashy cinematics of various art styles. All of that work may pay off for a new unbiased audience on the console, because they will essentially get to see not the New World that launched 3 years ago, but a New World with 3 more years of development time. And therein lies part of the problem. Because of their shift in their focus, they needed more time before they launched. Time that they were seemingly unwilling to give themselves, which may ultimately be the ultimate downfall of this game. As silly as it sounds to harp on this one thing, there is one clear, simple evidentiary piece to all of this. Swimming. Why would you launch a big budget game with an obviously incomplete feature? It wasn't that swimming was just not part of the game and they were going to add it in later. It was that the water in the game looked and acted like a bug. This does not look like a complete game to anyone. If a place was near water and you had to get around it, you had to walk underwater. and potentially die from doing so. The water was there. The world was constructed around the water being there. The drowning function was there. The 3D world itself was there. And they just didn't bother to finish it. Someone said ship it from the feel of it, and they went along with it. A studio with a huge budget, cinematic marketing to rival Blizzard, and the backing of one of the most profitable companies in the world couldn't bother to finish a core function of their game before selling it to people. The result was 3 years of memes and a crashed population. But at least those 3 years of memes covered up for other launch issues of the incomplete game, like being able to put HTML in chat and crash other people's games, or splash giant sausages in the chat windows, or invulnerability bugs due to incomplete hatchet builds. All of this in a supposed PvP game, mind you. And all of that is so freaking frustrating, because in another timeline, I think New World could have actually been successful. There's great lighting work, combat is fun, sound design is top tier, animations are great. It had potential, but so much was just wasted. And now New World is banking on that alternate timeline. It just so happens that that timeline is on consoles. For those of you embarking onto New World's new world in October of 2024 with their new launch of an old game, well, these are the positives. These are your positives to listen to, even if you played New World back in the beginning, because a lot of these have been positives that have been growing with the game over time. First, the combat remains one of the highlights of the game. It's not as over-the-top easy as most modern MMOs, though I'd never call it difficult. You can die to an odd mob you come across, at least more so than, say, Throne of Liberty or World of Warcraft. The animations and sound effects make for a satisfying crunch for many of your skills, even if some feel a bit off. It's not particularly complicated combat. Even when you start incorporating two weapon sets together, your skill tree is going to be very limited for an MMO, leading to the action nature of it, and actually fitting pretty well with the controller and consoles. It's far from perfect combat, but it's crunchy enough to make it one of the more interesting things to engage with the game. Similarly, harvesting, of all things, is extremely satisfying, due in large part to the animation and sound effects that go with it. I am not a crafter or harvester in games, but I always found myself engaging with it in this game, even if the end result of the crafting felt a bit blah. The PvE story is completely and utterly unrecognizable from what it was at launch. There are actual characters now that stick with you, of which there used to be none. There is an antagonist, a few of them. There are obviously expensive in-game cinematics to flash the sparkly little bits at you. You will find more engagement in the storyline of the island by far than what was presented in 2021. Speaking of sparkly bits, the lighting remains one of the game's best features, doing a lot of the work to really make the game zones come to life. Performance can be hit or miss. I noticed during the Aternum beta, my PC was actually chugging a little bit, and I'm not quite sure why, because that hasn't really happened before. Perhaps it had to do with the fact that it was the beta, but to get a really good feel for the look of the game, you need a decent PC. But one underrated part of New World that I really want to take a moment to give some credit to, because it's a feature that I really wish more MMOs would take on, is their music system. A while back, they added a little music minigame into the game, essentially kind of a crafting skill. It's very much a Guitar Hero type game that has a tangible benefit not just for yourself, but for others too. Playing songs, especially playing them well, can grant buffs to other players who can then provide you a tip for your performance. It livens up the world and harkens back to memories of music system on Star Wars Galaxies. I'd love to see the system utilized much more and develop more in the game, so I'm not sure it will. Still, they encourage you to use the skill with quests and such, so it's at least a decent part of the game. The last big positive, well, It's cheap. Granted, if you want all the bits and bobs of New World Aeternum, you're gonna have to probably upgrade. The base game still costs $30 right now. The expansion, Angry Earth, costs $30 as well, so $60 for both. And with New World Aeternum, you will get everything coming in with that new mini expand, whatever the fuck it is, a rebrand. You will get everything with New World Aeternum if you had Angry Earth plus New World. If you just have the base game though, you will have to pay for an upgrade. If you're buying it completely new, like you've never bought anything New World before, it'll be 60 bucks. And then that's about it. Unless you want to throw money at their cash shop or battle pass, which aren't really great, but they aren't super pay to win either. Amazon's other new game they're publishing, for example, Throne and Liberty from NCSoft, I'd arguably much more pay to win in a much worse way with their big end game PvP. But now, let's talk about the downsides. The first downside is going to be activities and queues. If you log into the game now and try to do just about anything, no queues will pop. Maybe if you're max level, but definitely not below it. I have tried this multiple times over the years, from 3v3 arenas to group dungeons. None of it pops. There just aren't any players to do it with. This might be remedied in part by some of the back-end changes they've made to these group finders, but also the influx of players in October. But if these don't pop, large parts of the game just die. Though they have at least remedied some of the things that were silly to have in the first place when New World launched, which prevented you from doing dungeons with people, like needing to craft items that were single use. They've gotten rid of that shit. But this next part really just shows how much they've shifted. The PvP is going to be a negative. Remember how I said New World had shifted from PvP survival to PvE? It kind of shows, even with the addition of a new PvP zone with Aternum. The game's territory control and taxation systems all still feel woefully out of place with every move New World has made after launch. They are echoes from a game that never actually got to launch, the survival PvP version of New World. They still have their dedicated players, but it just feels like fluff or a separate thing at this point, like open world PvP in WoW. Which is a shame, because PvP, like combat between two players, is actually pretty fun. The game is of course also limited in scope. Play as humans, run around as humans, a couple different weapon types, and some lore and story. Yes, they have added more lore, more story, and more weapon types, but it just feels less. Now I'll admit part of that is probably coming from just being a newer MMO compared to a Guild Wars 2, Final Fantasy XIV, WoW, or EverQuest, but it all just feels subpar. And I'm harsher on this game than I would be an indie game like Ashes of Creation, Pantheon, or Monsters and Memories, specifically because it is not indie. They have a huge budget. It has been reported that New World cost around $200 million to make over 5 years by launch. That would make it roughly the second most expensive MMO ever made for the numbers we've gotten. I mean, obviously Star Citizen is sitting around like 600 million now, but then back then we had Star Wars: The Republic, which reported $200 million to make. Does New World and Star Wars: The Republic feel the same in quality and content? I don't think so, at least especially not when they launched. And the thing is, it has now far exceeded all of that, because what this basically feels like, especially with this relaunch, is New World has actually not been launched. It has been in open development for 3 years, and they've just been selling it as a 1.0, because we are relaunching the game now. We're relaunching it with a new name now for a new audience. That's really what it's come to. We can like sugarcoat it all we want. This is a relaunch of New World 3 years after it launched. They're trying to somehow salvage it. This is 8, almost 9 years of development for this game, with hundreds of millions of dollars behind it, and one of the largest companies in the world. I just have to repeat that. This is one of the largest companies in the world. It is also the only game that Amazon Game Studios has ever launched. In a sense, New World is kind of feeling a bit like the beta for them to get ready for their Lord of the Rings MMO. So, all of that said, is it worth it? Like I said, it's kind of a hard answer because the game is not as bad as people will make it out to be. You can have fun in New World. I have had fun in New World, but it comes down to, is it worth it to you? This is not a different game. If you fundamentally did not like New World when it launched, you will not like New World Aeternum. If you're looking for a social MMO, I don't think this is it. They seem to be leaning more into the solo RPG story play, and there's part of me that kind of thinks they might have just been better served if they really did drop the MMO part and just release New World Aeternum as a solo RPG. Keep New World going, but release New World Aeternum by itself. Combat is reportedly good on controllers, so I think there will be a healthy enough boost of players with console when it launches in October. So if you want to get in and experience the game, like hopping in again, at least for a little while, go ahead and jump in. But, and this is a big but, I wouldn't drop any of current MMOs for this game. I wouldn't drop a Guild Wars 2, a World of Warcraft with War Within. I wouldn't drop Elder Scrolls Online if you like that kind of combat. I wouldn't even drop some testing MMOs. Ashes of Creation will be going into Alpha 2 about the same month that this is going live. You already have, with other MMOs that are in development, you have indie MMOs going into early access. You have Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, you have Corepunk, you have PAX Day, you have Brighter Shores from the people that created RuneScape. There's a lot of games to play. And beyond that, there's a lot of single player RPGs to play. So if you're looking at this from the single player RPG part of it, there are much better single player RPGs to play than New World. It kind of seems to fail on both fronts in some ways. But if you already have the game and you have a weekend, jump in, see what it's like. At least experience some of the swimming that's been added, if nothing else. Experience some of the cinematics, because the cinematics are good. The story is much more interesting than it's ever been. And it's always just a little bit fun to just listen to the world of Aternum, because there are a lot of people that worked on this game that did good jobs on the things that they were doing. The thing is, I don't see the point of the game. It's not bad. It's not a bad game. It's just a very meh game. It's very, very meh. At least that's my opinion on it.